Hey folks, welcome to Politics Simplified. This is my very first YouTube video, aside from a video I uploaded to my dog like 15 years ago. So if I stumble a little bit or make a mistake, just bear with me, and I promise to make this as painless as possible for everyone involved, including myself. If you are here, it's probably because either you or someone you care about is looking for a better way to understand politics, specifically large, complex pieces of legislation that seem impossible to unpack. If you guys recall the news earlier this month, there was a CR that got shot down. There was about 1,000 pages long. People were complaining about it, and rightly so. Large, complex pieces of legislation aren't fun to sift through. And unless you have a bunch of paid staffers on hand to kind of read through it and highlight what may be interesting to you, nobody's got time for that stuff. So you're probably here because you're interested in tools that can help make sense of it all. But before we dive into today's tutorial, I want to take a minute to share a little bit about why I created this tool and what inspired me to kind of start this channel. So on a personal note, I grew up in a very Republican household. Fox News was on pretty much 24/7. I live in a deep red state, and I can't get away from it. If I went to the Y and I started running on the treadmill, Fox News was always on. So it was pervasive. It was everywhere. It was every aspect of my life was drowned in Fox News, it felt like. So for most of my life, that was my lens on the world. You know, it shaped how I thought, what I believed, who I was voting for, etc. But as I got older, I started living on my own. I went to college. I had the chance to hear other perspectives, see different ways of thinking, meet people from different walks of life, really question the bubble I'd been living in at home. But as with all things, you know, that shift didn't happen overnight, and I know how hard it can be to kind of step out of a bubble that feels like home. You know, it's your comfort zone, you feel safe there. But my politics changed over time. Right now, I think it's safe to say that legacy media isn't really doing anybody any favors. There's a lot of sane washing going on in legacy media this past election cycle, specifically for Donald Trump. I don't think they were doing a very good job highlighting exactly how problematic he is or how problematic the prospect of a second Trump term would be. I don't know why that is. I don't claim to, be in the rooms when they're making these conversations, when they're discussing what they're going to talk about on a given night. I can only assume it has something to do with money. That's generally what I think a lot of stuff boils down to, is who's writing the checks. But I do watch a lot of independent media. I follow a lot of channels on YouTube. I get a lot of my news from there. But I didn't want to add another voice to the noise of independent political news channels because I think there's enough of them. I think a lot of them cover a lot of the same things. It just really depends on your flavor of influencer, right? Who do you like listening to? Are you a Kyle Kalinske guy? Or are you a Luke Beasley guy? Doesn't really matter. A lot of them cover the same content, and I appreciate the work that they do. But I don't know if there's necessarily a whole lot of room in that space. And my own perspective is that rather than reporting on news, I feel that educating people might be more helpful in kind of showcasing what their elected representatives are voting for and whether or not it's actually in their own best interests. I like I said, I live in a deeply red state where I see people vote against their own best interests constantly, and it blows my mind. And I genuinely believe that a large part of that is just a lack of education and a lack of understanding as to what their elected representatives are voting on, or against, for that matter. So that's why I'm taking this approach. I like playing with AI. I've been using ChatGPT specifically for about 2 years now. I use it a lot at work. I have a lot of tasks that I needed to automate. ChatGPT has been wildly helpful in that regard. I will never stop telling people to leverage these language models to help them automate stuff. I should preface this by saying I don't have any real coding experience. Everything I build for work, I actually leverage AI to do it. So ChatGPT has helped me build a whole bunch of Python scripts, help automate everyday tasks, stuff like that. But then as I started trying to explain politics to different people, it occurred to me that I could leverage these language models to better help people understand what was happening in the political space. You know, what are my representatives voting on? You know, when you talk about a 1,000-page bill that gets shut down, why does it get shut down? You know, what's in there that was so bad? What is pork? You know, who makes the determination as to whether something in a bill is pork or whether it's, you know, at least subjectively related to the broader intent of the bill, stuff like that. So, and then I realized as I was reading through some of these bills on my own, having an AI tool to kind of summarize these bills and make them a little bit easier to understand, laid out in layman's terms, essentially, might be a nice thing to have. So that's what I've done. So what we're going to go over today is a custom GPT that I put together that connects to, and this is going to get a little bit technical and I apologize, but it's an API provided by Congress. And this API can do a number of things. There's still more work that I have to do on this tool, but right now this custom GPT will allow you to basically look up any legislation that's currently in Congress, any legislation that's not currently in Congress, that's already been shot down, or already been voted on, passed into law, whatever, and summarize it for you. Now, the way the API works is it can pull the full text of any bill that's been uploaded into Congress. Sometimes you run into errors, but that's not too important to get into. And it can also summarize it for you. Now, the summary comes directly from Congress. That's important to know, but I'll kind of explain that as we go on. So without further ado, I guess let's go ahead and get started. Now, if you've ever used ChatGPT, this intro may seem a little bit remedial and unnecessary to you, but just for anybody new to this type of thing, we'll go ahead and walk you through from the beginning. So obviously you need an account at OpenAI. For ChatGPT, you do not need the Plus account. You only need that to, I think, build your own GPTs, but you can use any GPT on the marketplace with a free account. So I built the GPT on my personal account, and this is my free account. So we'll just show you how to get to that GPT so you can actually use it. So we will go to Explore GPTs over here on the left, and we will search for Policy Insight Hub. All right, you can see it's right here. And you can see that this is used to provide neutral fact-based analysis of federal policy and voting records. We've got some conversation starters here. These are kind of handy. These are just little shortcuts to things you can ask. I can do web search. It's got actions. All this really means when it says retrieves or takes actions outside of ChatGPT, this is the piece that allows it to speak directly to congress.gov. So we'll show you how that works here in a second. So we'll just go ahead and start a new chat here. And you can see it loads a brand new thing, but instead of showing you the GPT model you're in, it actually says Policy Insight Hub up here. And what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and start by clicking the starter question. How do I use this GPT? And you can see here, it'll give you a breakdown of what this is actually used for. It'll tell you the general capabilities, how to interact with it, ask about specific bills, explain broader topics, and then request a summary style. So before diving into details, it'll ask how you want the information explained. This is kind of tricky. Sometimes if it's pulling legislation directly from Congress, it forgets to ask you how you want the summary delivered. That is a glitch I'm still trying to work through. But you can see that it's got 5 different options here. You can have it explain it to you like you're 5. So if anybody's familiar with Reddit and the LE5 subreddit, it's a very basic, very high-level summary of the bill. Very, very simple if you just want the basics. Explaining like you have an 8th grade education, explain like you have high school education, explain like you have a college education, or I did this kind of as a meme, but I wanted to see if it would actually work. Explaining the style of Joe Rogan. I got this idea when everybody started saying the left needed a Joe Rogan. And it occurred to me it's not necessarily that I think, oh, we really need a podcaster on the left that does the same thing Joe Rogan does. But if you've ever watched the Joe Rogan show, and I tend to not anymore as he's taken his right-wing pivot, but when he's talking to folks, he has a very conversational style, a very specific conversation style that makes everything kind of easy to understand. It's very laid back, very chill. And a lot of people tend to do better when things are explained that way. I don't know. But I did this as kind of a meme, and it's weird how close that ChatGPT gets to sounding like Joe Rogan. But we'll look at that here in a minute. And then it prompts you and says, "You're unsure where to start. Just tell me what you need, and he'll guide you. You want to give it a try?" So I guess let's just go ahead and try to pull up a specific piece of legislation. So I guess we'll start with something that probably everybody knows about, but we'll start with, let's do the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So we'll just do good evening. Tax cuts. Good Lord, I can't type. So you don't need to be this nice to ChatGPT. Some people just kind of bark orders at it. I prefer to be nice. This is just how I speak in my everyday life. This is how I interact with service workers. This is how I interact with everybody in my life. I try to anyway. I don't think you need to do it for ChatGPT, but I may have grown up watching Terminator one too many times, and so I always like to be cautious, and I'm polite, but it is not necessary to be polite to use this tool. So let's go ahead and see this. You can see that it says starting action. It wants to know if it can talk to api.congress.gov. Always allow is perfectly fine. You see it's talking to api.congress.gov. And then it starts pulling the description. So this is, it'll tell you it was formerly known as HR 1. It was passed on the 115th and enacted in December of 2017. This significant tax legislation overhauled the U.S. tax code, blah, blah, blah. So would you like me to summarize its main points on one of the following styles? Sure. Just for fun, let's do we'll do the explain like I'm 5. This is just going to be a super basic explanation. And you can see here, it's a couple of paragraphs. That gives a really childlike explanation for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Imagine you have a piggy bank. Every time you get $1, you have to give some coins to a grown up. This law said, hey, you can keep more of your coins now. You really can't get more basic than that. So this isn't great for a super deep dive or anything. But to give you an overarching sense of what the bill was for, that'll do it. So we change it up a bit, and we'll change it to, we'll switch it up, and we'll say we need to have a college education. So this is going to go into a bit more detail. This will break down some of the individual deductions, or some of the individual changes for individuals, some of the changes for businesses. It does take a minute. As impressive as AI is, sometimes it does seem to generate its text a little bit slower, but so you can see here, it broke down the specific changes for individuals, changes for businesses, changes to international taxes, and then the impact and the trade-off. So short-term, boost take-home pay and corporate investments, GDP saw temporary uptick. Long-term, projected to add $1.5 trillion to the federal deficit over a decade to reduce revenue. Equity concerns. Obviously, some critics argued the benefits skewed heavily towards corporations and high-income households. That is true for the most part. The corporate tax cuts obviously were permanent. Some of you may remember that. While the individual tax cuts, if you guys have been watching the news again, are set to expire, I think in 2025. But yeah, largely people were saying the benefits to this bill largely went to the top 1%. So if we want more detail, or not more details, but we'll do something more basic. We'll see if we can simplify this a little bit more to make it a little bit more understandable. So we have here, you can obviously see where it's very similar to Joe Rogan's kind of laid back conversation style. A lot of mans, a lot of filler words. This explanation tends to be a little bit larger on metaphors. As I was testing this, it had some metaphors in there about UFC fights, which I thought was kind of funny. But this is kind of breaking it down in a simple kind of conversational way for people that maybe don't like reading something that's stodgy and kind of stuffy and boring. This does seem to make it a little bit more interesting. At least I can say that for sure. So this kind of breaks down how some of these tax cuts work. They changed the brackets, gave families with kids bigger breaks. Instead, you don't have to itemize stuff like mortgage interest unless it's crazy high. Breaks down a little bit on the SALT deduction. I don't know if you guys remember that, when they changed the SALT deduction cap, that hurt people in high tax states. Businesses, obviously, the corporate tax cuts were huge, going from 35 to 21% on a permanent basis. I think that was what caused the largest deficit increase, if I'm not mistaken. Wouldn't surprise me. And then, of course, the touch on how U.S. companies pay tax on overseas profits. So we can actually... Can you explain more about... So we'll get it to dive a little bit deeper into the corporate tax cuts in Joe Rogan style. Now let's give you a little bit more context. Before the law, the U.S. had one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world, 35%. So this kind of breaks down a little bit more detail as to what those corporate tax cuts actually were. This also delves a little bit into the law allowing companies to write off the cost of new equipment and investments immediately instead of having to wait. So they can do that all up front now. Now, a lot of that stuff, I'm sure you heard on the news, and actually brings it up a little bit here. A lot of the companies that benefited from these tax cuts took that extra revenue, and instead of using it to improve or expand or pay their employees higher wages, a lot of them did stock buybacks, which was good for their shareholders. It was good for their board of directors. Not so great for their workers necessarily. So this is where some of the criticism that I remember when this act got passed came from, was these companies were using these large revenue increases to do stock buybacks, which benefit primarily the board and their shareholders. So not a lot of pro-worker stuff here, and that perpetuates the myth of trickle-down economics, where it's not really trickling down to the workers. It's basically going to people who own stock and shareholders. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the gist of this tool. There's some other stuff the API can do. I was having some issues getting it working properly, so I took some of it out. But there's more stuff I want to put in here. The Congress API is really robust. For example, you can pull specific voting records. So for this specific bill, for example, there will be a way that I can use the API to talk to Congress and say, hey, how many people voted in the Senate for it? How many people in the House voted for it? Which members voted for it specifically. So if I wanted to know, for example, how Nancy Mace voted for it, I could pull that up. I can pull up a list of actions that have been taken on this bill, which is just, was it put forward to a vote? Did it pass through committee, et cetera, et cetera? So there's a lot of stuff I want to flesh out in this tool. It's just without a background in code, it does take me a bit to kind of figure out how to tie everything together and how to get it to work. But I do plan on building this out a little bit more. I think it's a useful tool. It's nice to know what our representatives are voting on. It's nice to know what parts of the bill are actually going to benefit me and my demographic versus, Elon Musk and his demographic. it gives you kind of a better idea of whether or not your elected representatives are advancing their own interests, or if they're advancing the interests of the 1%, or if they're actually looking out for the middle class. I think that kind of thing is what gets lost in today's discourse, is what's actually getting passed. Is stuff getting passed that's actually going to benefit me and my family, or is there stuff getting passed that's going to benefit the Waltons, who I couldn't care less about. They have a gajillion dollars. I don't care if they get any legislation passed that's going to benefit them at this point. So this is handy. I've started using this with friends that don't quite understand what's getting passed in different pieces of legislation, or they misinterpret it. Being able to utilize AI for stuff like this and leverage it to help kind of unpack some of this stuff, I think is a nice, useful tool that I haven't seen anywhere else or had access to previously, which is kind of great. So hopefully going forward, I can do more bills and we can kind of deep dive into some of the key pieces of legislation that have passed over the years. And I think ultimately what I want to do is use this tool to kind of showcase how different Congresses have passed different legislation during different presidencies, maybe, and do a direct comparison and contrast between different administrations. I think there might be a lot of value in that. Seeing, what passed during Reagan's terms versus what passed in Obama's terms, for example. Find out which party is doing the most to benefit the vast majority of their constituents and isn't in the bag for corporate interests, or the top 1% are trying to, pad their own coffers. So anyway, use this tool, share it with your family, use it to kind of help them understand what they're voting for and what kind of bills they're passing, and identifying if they're seeing stuff or if they're passing stuff that's against their best interests or whatnot. Let's use this to kind of change the narrative on who's actually looking out for whose best interests, and hopefully people can use this and make more informed choices when they vote next time. That's all we can really hope for. Anyway, if you guys like this and enjoyed it, throw a like and subscribe. If there's any bills you want to understand going forward, let me know in the comments, and I'll see what I can do. Maybe we can make it a weekly or bi-weekly video on explaining, larger pieces of legislation and kind of going through them and seeing what was in them. But we'll see. If you guys like it, let me know, and I'll see you next time.